The sisters of Lazarus sent word to Jesus, saying, "Master, the one you love is ill." When Jesus heard this, he said, "This illness is not to end in death, but is for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he remained for 2 days in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary sat at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise." And Martha said, "I know he will rise in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world." He became perturbed and deeply troubled and said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Sir, come and see." And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have done something so that this man would not have died?" So Jesus, perturbed again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay across it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, "Lord, by now there will be a stench. He has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd here, I have said this, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, tied hand and foot with burial bands, and his face was wrapped in a cloth. So Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go." Now many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what he had done began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, Lord.
It was her 32nd birthday. She stood at the side of the open grave with her 3 sons, expecting a 4th, staring at the flag-draped casket before it was received into the earth. Her husband, the father of her 4 children, was taken tragically from her life and from their lives. To whom did she turn in that overwhelming grief that she must have experienced? To whom did she turn with the anxiety and the fears of the future and the anger that she must have experienced during those days and weeks that would follow? Did she turn to a God that was omnipotent and omniscient, some ethereal entity out there somewhere? The creator of the world who manipulates his creation, deciding who lives and who dies? Was that the God she turned to? First time I ever had to preach on this gospel. It was 4 years after I was ordained. And it was about 4 days after we buried a very good friend, classmate, and a fellow deacon, Joe Gilbert. Joe and I, during the formation program, had grown very close. We were the two hellraisers of the group. We were the ones that would sneak into the retreat house kitchen late at night to scrounge around for some food. We'd take everybody else with us. I mean, we weren't selfish. But it was also the two of us who, on several occasions, when the cooks didn't show up at the retreat house on Saturday or Sunday morning, we were the ones that went in and cooked for everybody, including all the other retreatants. And it was those types of experiences that brought Joe and I together. And he died in a very tragic, foolish accident at his workplace, simply carelessness on somebody else's part. And as I realized that I was going to stand in front of the faith community at St. Mary's in Skinny Atlas and preach on this gospel, Joe kept being a part of who I was at that moment. And I remember in reading through the gospel time and time again and looking at commentaries and just, what do you want me to say, Lord? And while most folks, I guess, would focus on Jesus standing before the tomb and crying out, Lazarus, come forth, showing the power of God at work in the person of Jesus Christ, it was the human elements of the story that grabbed my attention. It became evident that obviously if Jesus loved Lazarus and Mary and Martha, he had to have spent a lot of time with them. These were people with whom he could be relaxed. These were people that after a long day of preaching and teaching and traveling, and he would come back to their home in Bethany and simply relax, to eat and to drink and to share stories and to laugh. A very human Messiah, a very human Son of God. And then when John relates that he was perturbed, and for us that means annoyed, but in the Greek, the literal translation is a snort of the Spirit. And if you can imagine a horse, at the beginning of a race, it's ready to go, and that you hear that noise from its nostrils. Scholars tell us that Jesus experienced anger at the death of his friend, that death would intrude into the lives of those he loved. And then we saw Jesus weep. A very human God in our midst. The same God that we celebrated the birth of just 4 months ago, seeing him wrapped in swaddling clothes. The adult Jesus, the Son of God, become human in our presence, in our midst. And it was his presence that Martha and Mary had requested. And when he came, there was a sense of calm. There was a sense that being here, God was present, and God would handle the situation. More so than the physical raising of Lazarus, it was God's presence to his people, to his children, that made the difference here. It would make the difference in the life of that 32-year-old mother. It would make the difference to Joe's wife and his children and grandchildren. One of the tasks of a chaplain in a correctional facility is to either inform a man of a death in his family, or in turn to notify the family of an inmate who has died. During these past 7 days, I've had to call 3 different men over to tell them that one of their parents had died. But one thing I learned early on in my ministry, and I'll be quick to say it, is I don't have any magic words to make your pain go away. And believe it or not, each and every one of these men who are convicted felons still have hearts who feel. And they experience that sense, that overwhelming sense of loss and pain And the deacon has just told them that your mom died this morning. But one thing I've also come to recognize is they know that when they come into my office and that door is closed, there is a presence there. And there's a sense of comfort on their part that they can show their grief. They can cry, they can scream, they can curse, they can do whatever. Because they know they're in a sanctuary. They're in a safe place where God is present. Not me, but God is present. And they will get out of their system all that they need to before they walk back out their door, because so many of them believe that if they show their tears and their grief in population, that they will make them vulnerable, that they in turn could become victims, because there will be those who will prey on their weakness. And so all their grieving is stunted into that short time that they're there. But inevitably, before they leave the office, they will say, thank you. Because they experienced the presence of God in that office, in the middle of a jail. We experience God's presence in so many ways in these moments of grief and in these moments of pain. There was the Latino patient in Walsh. They could not give him enough morphine to kill the pain without killing him. He was actively dying of cancer. And even in his sleep, his face would be all scrunched up. And walking into his room one day and seeing the Bible on his table, I simply grabbed it and started reading the 23rd Psalm. El Señor es mi pastor, nada me falta. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And as I read it and continued to read, you could see his face relax. And there was a sense of calm, and there was a sense of consolation and a sense of comfort, because he realized that God had become present to him through those words that he knew. Early in my chaplaincy, I had to call a young man over on a Sunday morning and tell him that his 5-month-old son had died of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, during the night. And I could remember all he did was pound my desk once and scream out at the top of his lungs, no. And then he ran out of my office. And I called over to his housing unit because I knew that's where he was going. And I told the officer what had just happened. I said, just open the door and let him in. I says, I'll get there as quick as I can. And when I got to the dorm, I went to his cube, and he was lying face down on his bed. And the sobs were coming from so deep within him, his body was literally lifting off his mattress. His grief was so profound. His sense of loss was so deep. And I didn't have a word to say to him. And another inmate says, Deacon, he says he's got a friend, he's got a homeboy in the day room. So I go in and I say the man's name. And this giant of a man stands up. He had to be 6'4", 6'5", at least 350 pounds. His hands were huge, and if he formed a fist, it was as big as a bowling ball, it seemed. And he stands up and he turns around and he goes, yeah. And he sees me, he says, what's up, Deacon? So I explained what happened. He says, I got it. And he goes into the man's cube, and he leans on his big locker like this, and he just begins to rub the man's shoulders. And he doesn't try to come up with any trite phrases. Oh, God wanted your son, or your son is with God. He simply said, let it all out. And then he just shut up and continued to rub. And you could see over a matter of a few minutes, the sobbing began to cease. No more words were spoken. But that man experienced the presence of God through this giant. Each and every one of us here knows how awkward we feel when we walk into a funeral home. And we want to come up with just the right words that will help the person that we care for, that we love, in their time of grief. And we stumble over our words, we trip over our tongues. And when push comes to shove, it's not what we say. It's simply our presence. And it's through us that God will make his presence real to those who are experiencing that grief and experiencing that loss. It's through us, through his word, through the sacrament on the altar, that he makes his presence real among us. And we in turn leave this place and make his presence real in our world. See in yourself, especially in these moments when we're confronted with the mystery of life and death, a mystery that goes beyond the limitations of our human language. Simply recognize that each and every one of us can be an instrument that makes God's presence real in the grieving person's life. And in turn, we pray that we can be open to recognizing God making himself present to us through others. The story of the raising of Lazarus isn't the miracle, not the coming back to life. It's the presence of God in the person of Jesus Christ. He made God's presence real to us. We in turn are called to make that presence real to those we encounter.